I'm so thankful that I can celebrate Christmas with you. Who knows what it'll be like next Christmas.
My grandfather died just a couple days after Christmas. He was 96 years old. He was never what you would call a big man, but he was always larger than life to his family.
Lord, I ask God's blessing upon each one of you, and be with us and lead us and direct us. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. I was very lucky to still have all of my grandparents with me as I migrated into my 40s. Each of them reached their late 80s or mid-90s, and I have only recently begun losing them. And I confess, in those 40-plus years, I've rarely faced death. Not like this. And I'd be lying if I said that I wasn't curious what my response would be to the extinguishment of those beloved lives. You see, among Christian friends who've deconverted, the one piece of stubborn baggage I hear more than any other is not the one you might think, the nagging nightmares about hell, but rather the realization that with the adjustment of their belief system, they must now release any hope of seeing their grandparents, parents, siblings, or even children after death. And while I was not fearful that looking directly into the maw of such an event would splinter my decision to abandon my faith and become an atheist, I did wonder if it might take on a crack here and there. Would the thought of oblivion cause me to question my position? Would my grief so overwhelm my reason that I'd be tempted to imagine my grandfather strolling the golden streets of heaven? I am quite certain this was on the minds of my religious friends and family. My grandfather spent his entire life as a missionary to West Africa and later as a pastor. The beautiful memorial service celebrating his life was a deeply religious affair, rightly reflecting not only his devout character, but also that of his community. Loved ones spoke of empty shells and infinite souls, of eternal joys and the ultimate negation of pain. And perhaps I was just projecting, but it was almost as if everyone I encountered was quietly thinking to me, "See how wonderful this is? See how nice it is knowing where you're going? That you'll see your loved ones again. Don't you want to come back to that?" In the end, I confess my grandfather's funeral didn't move the needle at all. I don't say that to brag about the structural integrity of my worldview. It's because at no time since I became an unbeliever was it more clear to me that my faith had been erroneous than after my grandfather's death. I remember feeling as if the world suddenly slowed down around me, and I was able to examine people in slow motion, crying, hugging, laughing, remembering. It was suddenly so clear, not in an academic sense, I'd already reconciled that, but instead in a profoundly personal sense, that the afterlife was a placebo for our pain and grief, that heaven was so obviously and manifestly invented to give us comfort and hope. And I get it. It makes perfect emotional sense. And who doesn't want to promise that something priceless will be returned? That we will be reunited with those we love most? That we will hold each other, hear each other's voices, walk hand in hand in a place of perfect bliss? A place where we do not end. A place where our stories continue forever. Where new chapters are always being written and where old characters make surprise returns. It's not hard, even for the most ardent atheist, to understand exactly why we cling to this belief, despite having zero evidence for it. My grandfather was the sort of man you invent heaven for. He was the sort of man who deserves a few eons in paradise, the sort of man with whom you cannot wait to be reunited. My grandfather is known for his enormous heart. To know him was to feel the embrace of unconditional love. When others resisted, he leaned in. In emotionally dry places, he was an oasis of affection. But I will never see my grandfather again. Not in this or any other world. He is returning to star stuff. He has ceased to exist. But our memories of him have not. And the love he shared and the good he did continues to gush through time. We sensed the end coming and had time to prepare. We had time to tell him everything that we wanted to say to him. And this blunted a lot of the grief of his passing. But what really transformed those past couple weeks from a time of mourning to a time of celebration, is how rich and how long his life was. During my grandfather's funeral, I felt as if the pastor was addressing those of us who were not believers, and perhaps he'd been asked to. Or again, perhaps I was just projecting. "What if this life is all there is?" he asked. "Wouldn't that be terrible? It's a lie of Satan that there is no God and no eternal life in heaven, because if not for God, Hermie Ingelgau's life would have been utterly pointless, meaningless, and devoid of purpose." But I don't see it that way. Even though my grandfather would have disagreed with me, we humans create our own purpose and our own meaning, and my grandfather lived an extraordinarily deep and extraordinarily long life, fashioned around a singular goal: loving and serving others. I can only hope to leave a fragment of his legacy. And if that is not meaning enough, and if that is not purpose enough, then there is none to be found anywhere. And if life is defined by the good we do, the love we share, and the impact we leave behind, then my tiny, adorable grandfather was a giant of a man who touched and transformed countless lives, not the least of which were his grandkids.